Welcome to the Harbor Freight Tools for Schools learning module on demystifying data for your skilled trades classroom. The video features Ellis, Senior Program Manager at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Ellis's work is focused on increasing access to and participation in quality education and employment pathways that lead to economic opportunity and upward mobility for Black and Latino young people and those experiencing poverty. In this module, she'll help you think about ways to make data more accessible and pertinent to your teaching practice. Just like in round one, there's also a brief reading on the same topic for you to review, reflect, and respond. In the meantime, we invite you to sit back and check out what usable insights you might be able to borrow from what Ellis has to say.
When I think about data specifically, I think about it in terms of it's information that we collect on a program or practice or people in the work to better understand how people are actually performing, how young people are performing, how we should design the program or how we should evaluate the program, right, in order to make it stronger for the intended purposes that it's designed for. So I think data doesn't have to be intimidating. I think some of the intimidation comes from data often being positioned as high stakes, right? And it's not always high stakes. Data could be very much low stake data, right? So it's not always about collecting the summative data that's going to be defining, right, in terms of what's next. It's about, what's some formative data that's out there, right? What's adaptive information? I think the biggest fear when it comes to data is how it's positioned, right? It's not the data itself, it's how the data is actually used. And I think so one of the things that we need to work on and demystify is this whole story around this data, like big data, right? Data doesn't have to be that way. Like, I'll take one example of making a decision about where to go to eat for dinner, right? What do I want? Do I feel like pizza or do I feel like a burger, right? And so what can you do? You can actually call some friends and ask, what are some recommendations, or call family. Oh, I can go online and check one of the popular websites like Yelp, right? Or Open Table and see what the ratings are. It's low stakes, right? And just collecting information because I know I either want a burger or I either want pizza. And so it doesn't always have to be this defining information, right? It's not an end all be all. And I think data is often positioned as being like an end all be all, right? Decision making, like proposition, and it's not always the case. Data is incredibly valued in a multitude of ways when it comes to the workforce readiness, career readiness space. So one, there is this still in schools, this othering of the skilled trade space. So one of the things that we're working on very specifically in the work that I do right now is how do we move in a direction of there's multiple quality paths, right, to a successful career and a successful life. It's not about just college. It's not about just pursuing a career. When I think about our work and moving in that direction of having educators and policymakers, right, and decision makers value multiple quality paths, what we need to do is elevate, right, those proof points that are out there, right, because there are good examples of good schools, right, and good educators who are doing a great job of connecting the dots between the academic side and the professional readiness side, right? So where does data come in? Well, data helps to make the case for those programs. I mean, there's so many good programs that exist. Where they have been really successful is that they do a good job of telling their story, right? So they tell a story of the program that they've created and designed for their students, informed by workforce data, right? So leveraging local labor market data. What are the jobs that are available now? What are the emerging opportunities that are coming their way in their regional, local labor market, right? How do they create paths aligned to those opportunities? There are programs that are thinking about all of these things and have built programs, oftentimes very much starting at the cohort size, right? So they may serve just 20 students, right? But over time, they can serve more students. But we need the data from those programs, like how you designed the programs, right? How you executed those programs, how many students were enrolled, how many students completed the program, how many students successfully attained a credential at the end of the program, and how many students were then placed in a job or an opportunity post-program, right? And doing what? All of those things are data points, right? That are super important. And when teachers educators, decision makers in schools, as they collect all that information, right? That information helps inform their program, refine their program, help them make the program even stronger so that they can then make the case, right? For local dollars, for state dollars, for federal dollars, like I have this strong proof point of a program that I think is really good. And here's the data. And here's the data that's aggregated by socioeconomics, by race, by different, there's many different ways in which you can disaggregate data. And then using that information to say, I think many more students can benefit from this, right? With increased funding, with increased supports, with increased training for teachers, right? They share that data with, again, they use that data to pursue philanthropic dollars, private dollars, to pursue public dollars. And that's where data can really help in a skills trade place. So one, I would say, again, after each day, after each session, I do take a step back and do your own reflection, right? Of, again, you designed for the day, you planned for the day, you executed that day, and take a step back and just assess, how did I do today, right? And what could I have done better? What could I have done differently? And what did I do really well that I'm just going to continue to do, right? So I think getting in a mode of being self-reflective and reflecting in action also during the day, I think is incredibly important. So that's one. The other thing I would say, if there aren't already spaces created for teachers to come together, then seek out peers that you trust, that you respect, that you admire, and maybe even some that you'd want to seek as a mentor, right? And set up some time with them, and maybe even through a regular cadence. I'd like to just check in with you, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly, monthly, or even quarterly. And I'd like to maybe even invite you into my class, if there's time, to observe me in action, right? There's only but so much that I know myself, that I can see of myself. I'd love to have somebody else come in and see me in action and provide me with some feedback. And I would say, get comfortable with feedback, right? And what often prepares us for those high stake conversations is if we've had enough lower stake conversations, when we enter the higher stake conversations, there are very few surprises. And if there are surprises in that conversation, you're like, interesting, I wasn't aware of that. And I've actually engaged others in viewing me in action, and they had a different assessment. And here's the data to support it, right? Because you've not only collected your own data, but as you're bringing other people in to observe you seen in action, providing you feedback and helping you along the way. When you're in those higher stake conversations, you're bringing all that data to the conversation. You're like, oh, this is very different from what I've heard, from what I've learned, from what other people have seen. Is there truly something different, or are our expectations not aligned, right? So what you were expecting of me and how I show up is not aligned. Let's get an alignment on what those expectations are, right? Because I'm truly taking the time to try to do what I think is best for my students and best for my class. And so those are some of the things that I just would recommend, is create those low stake data opportunities, collection of yourself opportunities. So when you engage in those high stake opportunities, there's little room for surprise, right? Some people do spreadsheets, right? Some people use a spreadsheet and they log, like, these are engagements I'm going to have over the year. And they may say, keep some categories around, this was the intention, this was the plan, this is how my students actually performed, this is what I think that, and then their observation on why they think their students performed a certain way or not, and what were they going to do differently. Some people just keep that simply on a spreadsheet. Some people prefer narrative form, right? Some people prefer to literally write in as if they're writing in a diary, because that's how they retain information, right? Other people record themselves in action, right, with the right permissions, right? Some people tend to, so I would say it's similar to people who work in the sports industry, right? So, right, you think of after each game, right, a team might sit and watch the game together and say, okay, this is what we went in to do. This is what's happened. There were some unexpected things that happened. This is the play that we took. What would we have done differently? What could we have done differently? So some people prefer to record themselves in action to see it, because they need to step out of the situation and they need to see themselves. So what I would say is that you want to collect good information and you want to be as objective as possible. So as you are writing, it's not necessarily about how you felt, right? It's about what you did. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you do? And what was the outcome? Like, that is it, right? Now, based on those facts, right? Because data is based on, a lot of it is like either collected or observable facts. Based on those facts, now what do I do with that information, right? What are some themes? What are some patterns? What did I learn? What do I learn? And then based on that, what would I do differently, right? So I would say just being very clear, whatever data you collect, you want to make sure the data is actually objective, factual information, right? So that's why I often push the self-assessment piece, the self-reflective piece is so important, but we need to be mindful of is that oftentimes it's from your own perspective. And so that's why having someone that you trust, a peer, a colleague, a leader, that's at another level or at the same level, come in and observe you is so important, because sometimes you see stuff and it's based on your perception of how you experienced the situation as opposed to what actually happened during the situation.